We're talking the reasons why, the hows, ifs, do's, don'ts and buts around grid penalties in Formula 1. And we've seen them applied in the last few weeks quite a lot. So a GPFans Special giving you all of the information that you need to know about those punishments we see pre-race. And of course, throughout the rest of this week, we'll be building up to the American Grand Prix in Austin, Texas. So hit that subscribe button down below to stay up to date with everything that we do here at the channel. But now, a GPFans Special all about grid penalties. The last few Grand Prix, we've seen a number of necessary grid penalties imposed by the stewards. Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, Nicholas Latifi and Charles Leclerc have all had to taste that punishment in recent weeks. In some cases, several drivers have had to start from the back of the grid. But how is this determined and who comes in front of who on that list? We'll explain right here in this special. So what type of grid penalties are there? Let's start by discussing the types of grid penalties out there. In principle, there are two grid penalties that can be dished out: technical and sporting grid penalties. Now, technical grid penalties are issued if a driver uses more components than the rules allow, or in cases where parc fermé regulations are violated. During the season, drivers may use up to 3 engines, or ICE, 3 MGU-Hs, 3 turbochargers, 2 energy stores, 2 control electronics, 3 MGU-Ks, and 8 exhausts. In the event that a new engine supplier enters the sport, the customer teams are allowed to get an extra part of anything with the approval of the FIA. A driver's gearbox must last a minimum of 6 races. Only if the driver has had a DNF recorded in the race before, he may get a new gearbox fitted earlier. If a driver exceeds the maximum number of parts, a grid penalty will automatically follow. The first time an additional element needs to be fitted, it costs the driver 10 places on the grid. If that element has to be replaced again, it will cost another 5 places. If a driver receives more than 15 places on the grid, he must automatically start from the back of the grid. From the moment a driver leaves the garage in Q1, parc fermé regulations take effect. That basically means that from that moment on, no further changes can be made to the setting up of the car. In the unlikely event that something is changed, a grid penalty will follow. Sporting grid penalties are issued by the FIA as a result of a violation on track. In the vast majority of cases, this concerns incidents during qualifying, but sometimes it'll also be as a result of an incident that takes place on a racing Sunday. Think, for example, of the incident, as we have been doing all season long, of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton at Monza. Verstappen was designated as the guilty party, but as we explained at the time, he couldn't take a time penalty because he'd already registered a DNF. That's why he got the grid penalty in Sochi instead for that coming together. So how is the starting order determined? During the first qualifying session, all drivers must set a time that is within 107% of the person's time who is in P1. A driver who cannot set a time must request permission to start the race from the back. A quick lap in free practice is enough to prove that a driver is fast enough to actually be involved in the racing Sunday if they're outside that 107%. A driver that's qualified will be placed behind all other offenders. If there are several drivers who have to join at the back of the field, the order in P3 will be considered. Then the grid penalties are applied in the order that the violations were committed. But if there are several drivers who have to start at the back of the field because of a new engine, the highest engine body simply looks at who finished highest in qualifying. For example, it could happen that Charles Leclerc's engine's change was announced earlier than Nicholas Latifi's, but that Latifi will start further forward on the grid. A final starting grid will be published 1 hour before the race, and from then on, nothing can change. In the unlikely event that a car is unable to start inside that 1 hour slot, such as Charles Leclerc had to face with in Monaco, its place will remain empty on the grid. If a possible problem is announced more than an hour in advance, the drivers are allowed to move forward and make up that position. So grid penalties will continue to be dished out as we move into the latter part of the season, particularly as some teams will look for those fresh engines for the final few races to try and get a little head start in the Constructors' battle for 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. And remember, Christian Horner didn't rule out more grid penalties for the likes of Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in their battle for the Constructors' and Drivers' World titles. As always, we want to know your thoughts on both grid penalties and what other specials you'd like to see us do here at GP Fans. Let us know in the comments section below and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with everything that we do here at the channel.